What's up, everybody? Welcome to the RotoGrinders Lineup HQ build show. 2-game slate. A lot of action tonight. I'm the Luch, and I'm here with Squirrel Patrol. What's up, John? How are you?
Good. Yeah, man. We, just wrapping up an exciting weekend of football. So yeah, diving right back into those NBA streets.
Right. We got Devin producing this thing. Big thanks to Devin, who is extremely active during football season. And it's winding down, but we are all hands on deck here at RG and a lot of great content. And yes, a 2-game NBA slate. We will still give you some good stuff for it. This might not move the needle for everybody, but for us, John, we're still here on the GPP streets.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and there's some good contests tonight on both Fanduel and Draftkings. I know Fanduel is running a qualifier for the basketball live final, which is something I'm always interested in. I don't think there's a qualifier on DK tonight, but it's going to be exciting. Still some big money to be won. So yeah, and only 2 games to get into. So it's a little bit of a different slate. And yeah, let's dive in.
Yeah, and with 2 games, you mentioned lineup construction is going to be integral. It always is, but with 2 games, you kind of have to fine tune your process, maybe even a little bit more. And you know what? There's a chance one of these games might be ugly. Every time you see Golden State and Detroit on the docket, you might have to do some more correlating.
Yeah. So the first thing that stands out to me when we get like a 2-game slate is that I think game stacking can be really important. And then we actually have an article that talks about this every day is the slate IQ for basketball. And it's really important because I think the section that I always pay a lot of attention to on when we have like a huge slate or a really small slate is the stacking section. It talks about game stacks and how often they're played in DK contests, and then how often they're found in the top 1% or 0.1% of entries. And so like, looking at the slate IQ, it shows that like for game stacks of like a certain size, 1 player from one team, 2 from the other, 3 from one team, 2 for the other, how often do those show up in the winning lineups? And what we see is that when you have a really small slate, like 2-game slate, you get a lot of leverage by playing game stacks, particularly 4-man game stacks, sometimes 5-man game stacks. It's about as high as I would run it. And it actually makes a lot of sense because if you look at tonight's slate, you have one game that's like a 14-point spread between Golden State and Detroit. Now, if that game blows out, you probably don't want as many players from that game. If it's close, that might be the game you actually need to be stacking. So I really like the idea. You got a 2-game slate, divide it up, or divide some section of your lineups into game stacks and to having, maybe 50% of the Knicks Timberwolves game, 50% of the Warriors Pistons game, because you don't know they're about the same game total. Just a huge spread difference, 14 points in the Golden State game.
Yeah, and which Golden State, which is by far the best team total on the slate. So, but obviously there's a couple different paths which way that result could end up, and how the 116 to 101 gets to that point is why we play the game. So you're absolutely right. And just looking at this first game on the docket here, pretty much any game is a pace up spot for the Knicks, but the Timberwolves have been really pushing the pace lately. I was looking at ESPN's pace, and some pace metrics are different from site to site. I was talking to Meansy earlier this week, and I think I was writing up the expert survey, and he was like, "Hey, where did you see Minnesota is?" I don't know where they were at that point, but we were looking at 2 different sites, and there's a bit of a different equation in terms of how they figured pace. Regardless, Minnesota's playing pretty fast. I'm surprised with how well they're playing defensively this season. A big step forward for them. The Knicks dealing with injuries. Derrick Rose has been out. Kemba, I believe Kemba is out. Alec Burks has been playing point guard, right? So, wow, here we are.
Yeah. So I think with that first game, I think the Knicks are probably the most banged up team on the slate. And so that's going to go into pricing. I think we're kind of figuring that Kemba Walker is going to miss this game. I think Nerlens Noel has already been declared out, and I think Cam Reddish is both traded and injured. So I don't think none of those three guys are going to play, or at least that's what we're expecting right now in the projections we've got. And so that makes the Knicks probably the most interesting team in terms of selecting guys, just because Thibodeau always plays those guys for really big minutes. Timberwolves have increased the pace a little bit this year, but they're also increased their defensive efficiency, I think. So they're a better defensive team this year, but it's still a pace up spot for the Knicks. And so with the guys being banged up, and also the starters and the guys who play expected to see big minutes. Like we expect a tight rotation with Thibodeau always. The Knicks are probably the most interesting team on the slate, and probably the team I'm targeting the most.
Yeah, and we're seeing some high projected ownership here for RJ Barrett and Alec Burks. And on this slate, 2 games, it's warranted. I mean, big pace up spot. You're seeing RJ into the low 7K range now on DK, 7,300. Are those two the cash plays of this Knicks team?
I think so. I think especially on DraftKings, I think Julius Randle is probably the safest player on the slate, right? You'd think Steph Curry, but that 14-point spread is a little bit scary. Like he may not see the court in the fourth quarter, but like Julius Randle is going to play no matter what. I mean, this game's a lot less likely to be a complete blowout, and Randle always just plays big minutes, and so does RJ Barrett. I think it's probably 1 and 2. Yeah, Randle and Barrett are the cash game starters. Where I'll start my cash games for the slate.
Randle just gives you that super high floor, because even if he's not scoring, he's rebounding. And that's one thing you can do against Minnesota. So I'm with you there. Knicks are the team to target. When you talk about tournament options, and we'll get into Fanduel, where there's a couple more center only eligible guys on this slate. Mitchell Robinson, I know he's still carrying, even on DK, 30 plus ownership, but again, 2-game slate. Anytime a guy offers serious block side like that can really break a slate, I think Mitchell Robinson's interesting. Evan Fournier is the headache, right? His 3 best games of the year were all revenge games against Boston, John. But his minutes have kind of been fluctuating. Now, if you look at his log recently, he has had a couple of blowouts, and he actually did have a few pretty high usage games within the last 10 days or so. 2% on a 2-game slate, anytime Fournier is in that 5K range, that might be a guy where maybe I'm setting some build rules. Maybe I don't want to play him with RJ Barrett with the ownership, totally different ends of the spectrum there. What are your thoughts about Fournier and Robinson?
Yeah, it's tough to get a handle on them. I was watching some of those. I think like the 2 huge games he had, especially like the first one against Boston. I think that was on like national television, or maybe I was just watching on in League Pass or whatever. But I remember sitting there thinking like, I'll miss out on this game. Like I don't have any Evan Fournier. I had 150 lineups, no Evan Fournier, and I'm just gonna take that, right? Like I'm willing to miss out on the big Evan Fournier games that come out once in a lifetime. Then I think it was like the very next game, he kind of broke the slate too, like 32 points. It's difficult. Yeah, I like the 2-game slate though. I mean, everybody has to be in play. So, especially if you're doing like 150 lineups, if you're multi-mass entering. I'll have some Evan Fournier. I really like the call to maybe exclude RJ Barrett from those Evan Fournier lineups, because I think if Fournier is absolutely going ballistic, then it's probably taking away from someone. And like you said, like Julius Randle can get there with rebounds. He's going to basically on a 2-game slate, Julius Randle's going to get there on his minutes alone, right? Like rebounding, blocks, whatever he's doing, he's going to get there. RJ Barrett is maybe a little bit more scoring dependent. And if Evan Fournier is putting up with another 41 points, that's probably coming at the expense of RJ Barrett. So yeah, I think tournament options, I think you can play some Evan Fournier. I'll probably do it in a fairly small percentage of my lineups, but I do like the idea of excluding Barrett from those lineups.
Yeah, and it won't project the best. You can see our smash percentages, and Barrett is leading the Knicks in that regard on Lineup HQ here. But I get like a couple shares of that kind of strategy, I think is fine. Anything else on the Knicks side of things here? You have some cheap value guys that are going to carry some ownership because, again, we're on a 2-gamer. But, Manuel Quickly, we've seen some upside out of him in the past. A lot of things need to go right, I think, for Quickly to kind of get there, have a ceiling game, I should say. I mean, he's still projected to carry a good amount of ownership. And quite frankly, there's just really no value yet tonight anyway, knock on wood. I mean, who knows by the time tip-off rolls around. But what are your thoughts on Quickly?
So I like Quickly a lot. He's a second-year player. I think he's somebody the Knicks are trying to develop. I think especially with Kemba Walker likely to miss this game, then that really gives me a lot of interest in Quickly. I think if Kemba's playing, I'm not as interested at all in Manuel Quickly, but I do think Matt was 4,000 on DraftKings. That's a really good price. For somebody that could see minutes, like 29 minutes last game. So I think he'll get there at 4,000 if Kemba is missing this game. So he's someone I'm highly interested in if Kemba's missing this game. And I will pair him with any of the Knicks. I think you can play Quickly in RJ Barrett. I think you can definitely play Quickly in Randall. And I forgot to mention Mitchell Robinson. You're right. He's somebody that I'm definitely interested in. I think 5,400 on both sites. He's a little bit of a better scorer on Fanduel, just with the blocks being 3 points. But I think you can definitely play him on either site.
Yeah, I think so. And 2 games, maybe we're better just sort of flipping over to the Minnesota side and wrapping this game up here for DK. And we could talk a little FanDuel towards the end because we know there's always some pricing discrepancies between sites. So, good call on Quickly. Promising player, has a lot of upside for the future there in New York. Minnesota, I mean, listen, we finally had a couple of weeks where we have the big 3 playing together. I guess we were kind of spoiled maybe to some regard with, having one of them miss some time pretty frequently where there's usage bumps to one of the other 2, whether it's D'Lo or Towns. Karl-Anthony Towns is playing great basketball this season. The 3 of them are playing well. The Knicks are typically not a team you enjoy targeting players against because they're slow and they're efficient defensively, but you don't have a ton of ceiling options on a 2-game slate. And, the 3 quote unquote ceiling players in Minnesota, offer that at any given slate. So you can see the projected ownership here for Minnesota that it looks like nobody's going Anthony Edwards. Looks like nobody's going to D'Angelo Russell. And it looks like nobody's going to Karl-Anthony Towns.
Yeah.
Are you licking your chops as a tournament player?
I think so, because I think, this is why you want to do some game stacking, especially on a 2-game slate, because it's unlikely that you get a bunch of Knicks, getting there without some Minnesota players, without 1 or 2 Minnesota guys getting there. I think on DraftKings, like the guy that's most appealingly priced is probably Patrick Beverley. And so I think he'll be getting some ownership. I think, we got him at 70 something percent. So I think he's definitely interesting. But yeah, you can go with the high upside guys, right? Because it's not necessarily going to be Patrick Beverley. And if Beverly's really high owned, maybe you want to be pairing all these Knicks that you're playing with somebody else. So, you can pair, Karl-Anthony Towns, although that might then limit your Mitchell Robinson usage. But then, Anthony Edwards, D'Angelo Russell, probably the guy for the price that I'm most interested in just for tournaments is D'Angelo Russell because he's an explosive scorer. I think he's got the best price on DraftKings relative to the other guys, but really you're probably going to see really low ownership on the Minnesota guys outside of Patrick Beverley. And that's something I'm definitely interested in, especially if I'm playing like 4 Knicks in the lineup.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And we saw Beverly, I don't remember which site it was up to like 6,700 a couple of days ago, which was strange to see, but 55 with his role on that team, even with his colleagues all healthy there, offers a high floor, I believe. And I think you nailed it. Should see about 30 minutes, and that's what we have him projected for. Are like with these 3 Minnesota guys, what's your limit on them for tournaments? Are you willing to pair 2 of them together on this slate?
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely play around with that. That's something I'm not going to do on a majority of my lineups. And like for single entry, I think you're probably giving up too much projection if you're spending a lot of money on like Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards. But it's something like if I'm only going to play 1 or 2 guys from the other game, because I think it might blow out. Then I'm going to end up with a bunch of guys from this Minnesota Knicks game. So yeah, maybe I'm playing 3 Knicks and I'm trying to squeeze in Anthony Edwards and Carl Anthony Towns. But I think you can play kind of any combination, especially those top 4 guys, Beverly, Russell, Anthony Edwards, and Carl Anthony Towns.
Agreed. If one of these games blow out, and who's to say this game won't blow out in one way or another? Vegas just pegs it to be a lot less unlikely that it does, but it's an outcome. This game could blow out, and then you could see a bunch of snowflakes on your mobile app on this slate, and maybe have a winner.
Yeah. I mean, you're really trying to just beat the other contestants, right? You're not trying to beat, you can't beat last night's scores or the week, last week's scores on this slate because there's only 2 games. And there's a possibility you get 2 blowouts, right? But there's also a possibility you get 2 like double overtime games, right? So yeah, you're just trying to beat the other contestants. But it's very possible you're going to win this thing with a snowflake, just because there's only 2 games. so if they're both a little bit low scoring, you're not going to need 7 times the salary necessarily from all of your players to win a tournament.
All right, let's move on to the second game, the late night hammer, Golden State and Detroit. Right now we have Golden State projected 116.5 to Detroit's 101.5, and Detroit, very young team, trying to figure out what they have. Most of them are, outside of Jeremy Grant, I guess I shouldn't say that, are healthy. They just can't get their nucleus together at the same time this season. Boy, did we have a couple of fun Diallo weeks about a month ago when he was the usage guy. Someone I never thought I'd be rostering in December as much as I was. And they have some promise out of him too. Cade Cunningham carrying a ton of ownership here. I'm looking at Detroit's team on Lineup HQ, and rightfully so. He's pretty much lived up to expectations, and he's probably not getting more publicity than because he's in Detroit probably. So he's been great. Sadiq Bey, 6,800, also had his time for a couple of games when he was the usage guy. He had a couple of ceiling games this season. Then you just have a kind of the rest. You have a bunch of role players where minutes are, in the teens and the low 20s. And from slate to slate, it's kind of hard to peg, who it's going to be. Like, is Saban Lee going to get more burn than Killian Hayes tonight? Sometimes it's totally up in the air. I will say, I know you probably follow a lot of the same people I do, and my Twitter follows are full of beat writers, and Rod Beard does do a great job for Detroit. He's one of the best beat follows, I think.
Anyway. He's like the most DFS friendly like beat writer out there. So yeah, Detroit's interesting, like you said, but I think there's some advantage we can gain here because Detroit has certain guys they just don't play at the same time. So I'm actually kind of interested in both Isaiah Stewart and Trey Lyles, just not in the same lineup. But I think they're both kind of the center types that can get there against the Golden State team that plays a little bit smaller, but like they're not the big lumbering center types. So I think, you can play so Cade Cunningham, to start off, is definitely the Piston I'm most interested in. And then I do think Sadiq Bey is interesting as well. But then I also like the idea of tournaments, if sneaking in one of these centers, Trey Lyles or Isaiah Stewart, just not playing them on the same team.
I think that's a great call. If one of those two gets a little handsy, gets a little foul trouble, we can see some extra run for one or the other. And, you look at Stewart's 2% projected ownership here, and that could be a lot of fun if the cards fall where they may. Josh Jackson, again, not a ton of value on this slate. We have him projected at just under 40% ownership, 3,600. There's just no value. So it looks like we have Jackson projected as one of the chalk value pieces here. What are your thoughts? Cunningham 60% is that warranted on this slate? Where are you at with him in that ownership?
Yeah, I actually think it's warranted. I mean, 60% is a lot of ownership, but I mean, he's probably the safest Piston because I think he'll see the court. Even if it's a blowout, they're going to want to see him against Steph Curry. So I think they're going to play him. He's going to get the minutes, and I'm not that concerned about a blowout. Whereas maybe some of the other Pistons, it's more likely they're getting yanked off the court if if Golden State's up by 25 or something in the fourth quarter. So yeah, Cade Cunningham is probably the guy that I'm most interested in from the Pistons. I think he's got the most upside, and especially playing against Golden State. I think it's a good matchup for him.
Yeah, and I like the group call with the Trey Lyles and Stewart call. Anything else in Detroit, or should we transition over to Golden State?
So just like the point guards, I think Killian Hayes is in play, but again, you kind of need to be paying attention to the rotations. But yeah, I think Killian Hayes is a guy that I think I would have some tournament interest in, especially if I'm playing multiple Golden State guys.
Agreed. And, we haven't projected for 26 minutes, and he's not the most efficient per minute producer, especially when they're healthy. But on this slate, if you have someone under 4K that's going to play that much and, sub 5% ownership, I agree. I think there's tournament interest there in Killian Hayes as well. Golden State, we listen, they're the heavy favorites, highest team total. The blowout is the biggest concern in this game, it seems, from a rostering Golden State perspective. Curry 10-6 on DK, still looking like he's going to carry about 40% ownership. We haven't projected that. Otto Porter is kind of interesting at 58 without Draymond. He's been playing pretty well. It's a fair price for him on this 2-gamer, I think. Now, if we had 10 games, I don't know if I'd be in a rush to have Otto Porter shares, but looking at his 2% projected ownership and what his role has been from time to time without Draymond, I think Otto Porter is kind of sticking off the page for me a little bit here as a tournament option. And of course, Jordan Poole up to 6K. Disappointed a couple weeks ago as one of the chalkiest players of the season, when he didn't have Curry. But here we are, and he's 6K against Detroit. It gets interesting with these bench pieces if we talk blowout. If in your blowout builds, if you think this thing's over after, midway through the third, and then you have Damian Lees and Kuminga, and this is where you really use lineup HQ to its fullest, and correlate some groups and some corresponding players and stuff like that. So talk to me about Steph Curry first. Let's start there.
Sure. So I have high qualified interest in Steph Curry, right? Because this game could blow out. But Steph Curry could also put up a certain number of raw points that you need to have on the slate. What I really like is the idea of playing Steph Curry, but especially if you're doing multiple lineups, you're setting some kind of rule or group where if you're playing Steph Curry, you're playing at least one Piston, right? If Steph Curry is getting there, that likely means some Piston is scoring enough to keep this game within 25 by the fourth quarter. So, and that's actually true of Klay Thompson as well. I have some tournament interest in Klay Thompson because I think Golden State's the only team on this slate, I think, that didn't play yesterday and is not playing tomorrow. So I think Klay should see some run. Like he's going to see the full minutes. And it's one of those situations, you always see the situation with players coming back from injury where their price starts out really high and the coach doesn't want to give them full run. So they're playing, 20 minutes. And then the price drops, right? Because they're only playing 20 minutes. So they don't get, to the point they need to get to hit their salary. So then Draftkings drops their price, and you get that thing where the price is dropping as their minutes are increasing. So if Klay Thompson is playing, let's say he's playing the most minutes that he's playing so far this season. Let's say he's playing 24 minutes. And he's priced at only 5,500 on DraftKings. Like he can get there. 3-point bonus, right? Half point, 3-point bonus on DraftKings. So Klay is somebody that I'm interested in. I think he'll be correlated with Steph Curry with a game having a 14-point spread because I think they'll come off the court at the same time, or they'll be there on the court at the same time late in the fourth quarter. So interested in Steph, interested in Klay Thompson, but I want to pair those guys with at least one Piston. It'll probably be Cade Cunningham most often, but I think you take any of the Piston starters and correlate them with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson.
Klay is very interesting, and you hit the nail on the head. We haven't projected for 25 minutes, and the NBA. If you like gossip and rumors and bending the truth, then you're gonna love Coach Speak because oftentimes, my favorite is so and so's minutes will be monitored, and he plays 35. That's my favorite. But who's to say Kerr won't discreetly keep Klay out there for 28 minutes? When is the invisible leash going to come off? And it could come without warning. So if Klay Thompson plays a couple minutes more than we haven't projected at this price, and I'm looking at his game log, he's been okay per minute, but he hasn't shot the ball well. Eventually that's going to come around. And when it comes around, it's going to come in bunches. And, he's played Cleveland, very good defensively. Memphis, pretty good defensively. Milwaukee, good defensively, fast and pace. And Minnesota, who we talked about, are the surprise, like defensive efficiency January award so far. Like I'm shocked that they're playing as well as they are defensively. So this, Detroit might play slow, but in terms of defense, I think this might be the friendliest matchup he's had so far. So, 55 on DK. I think you made a lot of good points there. I'm interested.
Thanks. Yeah, and let's not forget it's a game at home as well. So maybe they're more inclined to leave him out there for a few more minutes if he's hitting some 3-pointers. I mean, if he's hitting 3-4 3-pointers, this game's a little close. The crowd's going crazy. Yeah, maybe Curry's going to leave him in for 28 minutes. We don't know, especially if they had rest yesterday, have rest tomorrow. So Klay Thompson's somebody I'm interested in, but again, it's going to be probably paired with at least one Detroit Piston. But we should talk about what happens if the game blows out, because there's actually some different guys I'm interested in then as well.
Yeah, let's go that route. Mentioned a couple of them at the top, whether it's Kuminga, Belitza. These bench players are pretty good when they get the time. Like Golden State has a very talented bench, at least from a daily fantasy perspective. They like to get the ball up. So talk to me about these bench guys, and what do you do with Detroit pieces when you play Golden State bench pieces?
Right. So the guy that I'm really interested in is Jonathan Dominga. He's priced at 4,300 on DraftKings, and yeah, he's been going absolutely berserk lately. The last game. Then, so we should say there's a qualifier here that Gary Payton II, I think, got injured a couple games ago, and that seemed they don't they're not the same size and they don't play the same position, but for whatever reason that seemed to lead to some increased Kuminga minutes. Could have been a blowout factor. I think it started that game against Chicago and Golden State won by 40 something points. But Kuminga had a huge game, 25 points. It's like 42 DraftKings points. And he was priced at 3,100 then, now he's 4,300. So that's his price has come up a lot. But if Gary Payton, especially if Gary Payton II is out again, I think I've got to be interested in Kuminga because it's just gonna be more minutes to go around. And it also, if this game blows out, I think Kuminga is one of their lottery picks. So if he's in the rotation, I think he's really safe in a blowout. And we've seen now some like incredible point per minute production. We've seen some incredible raw point production, especially priced at 4,300. And then in terms of the Pistons, I think there's pretty much anyone's safe on the Pistons if you're pairing with Kuminga. Like I wouldn't necessarily say if you're playing Kuminga and kind of angling maybe this game blows out, you then can't play somebody else. So I think Cunningham is still relatively safe, unless the game gets totally out of control at 40 something points. I think Cunningham will still be in there. I think Killian Hayes is a younger player, so I think he'd still be in there. Josh Jackson, I think, is coming off the bench, so I think he would still probably be safer. Maybe like Trey Lyles and Isaiah Stewart, I'm a little bit less likely to play. They'll probably take out the big men first. But yeah, I think Kuminga is somebody I'm definitely interested in. We'll see. It'll be interesting to see what his ownership is. I guess we got to have it at 27% on DraftKings. I think he's a good tournament play. I don't know that he's somebody I'd play in cash games, but he's shown the upside for tournaments.
I agree. He's been aggressive, and he, look at these usage rates in his game log now. Some of them were only a couple minutes on the court, but he's played quite a bit recently. 22, 23, 38, 34. I mean, wow, when you see usage rates like that, you have to be encouraged. I think that solidifies him as probably my favorite Golden State bench piece as well. Those are some big time usage numbers from the lottery pick there. Anything else on the? Go ahead.
Yeah, just one last thing on this game. I do think it's important that Gary Payton II is questionable, because I think if he's in play, like being in the second game on a 2-game slate, like he should get some ownership. And he probably won't because he's questionable. And if there's no announcement made by the time 7:30 locks, which we may not get because there's a 3-hour space, I think, between these 2 games, we probably won't get word on Gary Payton II. So he's somebody you want to consider if you're multi-entering. We've got him 0.07 ownership. So you just want to be paying attention there. You probably want to go a little bit higher on guys like Dominga if Gary Payton II is out. Damian Lee is another guy that might come in. Bielitsa, somebody that might get a few more shots if Gary Payton II is out.
Okay. We won't go too much longer here. Let's do this. Let's list a couple of cash core plays. And then we'll look at FanDuel briefly, and just I know there's a couple of big pricing discrepancies with a couple of players. So if you don't mind, let's do that. And I know we talked about a couple of Knicks guys being high floor, very viable for cash options here. I just sorted by projected ownership, and we have Randall, Barrett, Burks, all 70+%. How many Knicks can you play in a cash lineup tonight, Squirrel?
Yeah, I mean, I probably set the limit at 4. And some of this is going to depend. We're presuming Kemba Walker's out, which is making like Alec Burks a lot more attractive. If he's in, then Burks is probably not as attractive. I think the guys I really like though are Barrett and Randall. And I think you can put Quickly in there as well. And then if Mitchell Robinson fits in that build, then he fits, and you've got 4 Knicks. Or if you're using Alec Burks, I probably wouldn't go over 4, just because you do kind of want to spread it out a little bit. Like if you're playing all Knicks and they get blown out of the water just relative on a 2-game slate, then you're kind of sunk. So, but I think Barrett and Randall are the 2 guys you definitely want.
I'm with you there, and I know I'm just like playing a bunch of this super chalk here, but on the flip side, I think Beverly is my favorite play from Minnesota, and per dollar for cash if you're playing cash tonight, and good luck if you're playing cash tonight. But if you are, I think Beverly's probably one of the safest floors at 55. I think Beverly, for me, is part of my cash core as well. Cade Cunningham at 75. Would he be part of your nucleus? Maybe we can give one more play here for the core.
I don't know if I'd necessarily go with him in the cash games, but I think you can. He's not somebody that I think you have to stick in there, and it kind of leads in well, right? Because we're talking about salary differences, because he's 7,500 on DraftKings. I think if you're starting off your lineup there with like Beverly, Randall, and RJ Barrett, Cunningham can fit in there. But he's 7,500 and he's only 6,200 on FanDuel. So I think he's a cash game lock on FanDuel. I think he's cash game viable, but not necessarily a lock on DraftKings.
Yeah, good point. And that's a good transition. He probably segues the cash core on the cash core conversation on FanDuel. I agree. Big discrepancy there. That's just way too cheap. And I'm sorting by P-own on FanDuel, and we have Julius Randle at 82% and Cade Cunningham at 68%. 6K flat for Cade Cunningham. Just looking at some of the pricing here as I'm looking at projected ownership on FanDuel, RJ Barrett is up in the 7K range as well. Sadiq Bey, 61, a little bit cheaper here. Wiggins under 6K. It looks like Wiggins is going to carry a decent amount of ownership on FanDuel, and I'm guessing that's probably a price thing. I know we're dealing with a very small Clay sample size this season, but so far I think Clay has affected Wiggins' role the most. I was just looking at usage rates and things like that. What are your thoughts on Wiggins in general on tonight's 2-gamer? You have any tournament interest for him?
Yeah, I have tournament interest, and cash game interest as well, because I think he's a guy that has another massive price difference between FanDuel and DraftKings. I think there's a $900 price difference. So he's much more viable on FanDuel. I think 5,800 is a great price for him compared to like 6,700 on DraftKings. I am a little bit worried about the Klay Thompson, cut in, but the price difference I think more than makes up for that. So he's definitely somebody that you can play on FanDuel, and also like FanDuel, you got to play 2 small forwards. The multi-position eligibility this year on FanDuel makes that a little bit easier. But Andrew Wiggins, small forward, 5,800. That's a great price. So I definitely stick him in as a core piece in cash games. There's another guy, Hamidou Diallo, actually has like one of the biggest price differences between FanDuel and DraftKings as well. So Diallo is much more viable on FanDuel. I think was it DraftKings. I think Josh Jackson was the guy that was popping, and those two kind of don't necessarily share the court that much. So maybe it's a Diallo Knights on FanDuel and Josh Jackson on DraftKings.
Yeah, good call. Another one that caught my eye is Otto Porter is jacked up to 6,900 on FanDuel. Tough to play him. 58 on DK, I think. So I think Porter might be more of a DraftKings play for me. It's always fun to talk about these discrepancies, and they make quite a difference if you're playing both sites. You're gonna have different players in your pools tonight, probably based on price alone. 6K is just way too cheap for Cunningham and his role. Like you said, like there aren't many paths where he should be yanked off the court completely unless it's a super slaughter. So we have him projected for 35 minutes, and FanDuel, he's probably my favorite, cash play per dollar. If we're going there, but I think some of the principles you talked about on DK, I really like the Isaiah Stewart and Trey Lyles group. I think that can carry over regardless of price on FanDuel as well. And neither of them are even close to 6K. And you still get, well, they're kind of close to 6K, but you're still getting Stewart, sub 10%, who we've seen his ceiling last year countless times. And now everybody just thinks he's the guy who throws hands with LeBron. They don't remember the ceiling that he had. So I don't know. Any other thoughts on FanDuel in general, John?
Yeah, just remember the scoring differences as well. So some of the centers, like you said, Isaiah Stewart, if he's getting blocks, that's 3 points a block compared to 2 points. That can add up, right, in a 2-game slate where every point's probably going to matter. Those make for a little bit more of appealing tournament plays.
Yeah, it's kind of just screaming Mitchell Robinson as well. I think he's squarely in play, both sites and probably in all formats at that price. So good stuff. I guess that pretty much wraps up this 2-game slate. We're right about on time. Before we go, anything else, or are we out of here?
No, just remember your game stacking. Remember, pay a little bit of attention to the court rotation. See who's sharing the court at the same time and who doesn't overlap. And you probably don't want to play those guys together in lineups unless you're really getting a price savings. But yeah, it should be a fun little 2-game slate.
Awesome stuff. Well, appreciate it. Always a pleasure, my friend. And big shout out to Devin, who is producing this thing for us. So for John and Devin, I'm Justin. Good luck tonight, everybody, and have fun.